talk about multifamily, which I know, and I know these numbers well, right? So there's 20 million multifamily or apartment units in the United States that are not part of the mom and pop group, the single family rentals and the duplex rentals. There's 20 million apartments, right? Well, so let's assume every apartment complex in the United States is 100 and I'm going to say 200 units. I'm actually going to be fairly generous and say 200 units. So if that means there's 100,000 apartment complexes, 100,000 multiplied by 200 is 20 million, right? So there's 100,000 apartment complexes. And we know for a fact that the ones that are at risk of default are 3,000. That there's a number of 2,500 and there's a number of 3,000 from two different groups that are measuring it, and they're measuring it slightly differently. So one group says 2,500 properties at risk of default, the other one says 3,000. So it's very important to understand, of the total multifamily market in the United States, which I just quantified ballpark as 100,000 apartment complexes, 3,000 are at risk over the next 18 months of defaulting simply because they can't pay, the interest rates are too high, right? And they don't have the ability to refinance because values have gone down, right? A year and a half from now, those values will go back up because multifamily values were very smooth to decline with interest rates and will be very smooth to go back up because there's simply the values be just based on the interest rates. So interest rates go down, values will go up. It's just basic math. And we've already seen it happen in the last 12 months. So we can't really say this is not the way it goes. So the risk is really the next year and a half, because a year and a half from now, you might have 150 basis point cut, 100 basis points this year, 50 next year. And now all of a sudden that pushes the floor on the values, and the values start to go up. And at some point, some of those properties that are at risk may be able to refinance. They might have to put in $1 million or $2 million more, but they can refinance and not default, right? So 3,000 properties are really at risk. That's 3% of the multifamily market. So what does that mean? That means discounts. Am I getting discounts? Absolutely. I just put a property into contract called Midtown Ridge, about 200 units. And that property is 37% off from the peak price, right, in March 2022. Now, that peak was very short, right, because it was a very sharp upwards peak and a very sharp downwards. So if anyone's saying, really 37%? Yeah, but it's for a pointy peak, right? If you sort of look on either side, maybe a couple quarters on either side, it's really down 20%. So maybe let's use that number instead of using the 37% number, because I'm going to get in trouble for that. So they're down 20%, right, from a peak-ish, not peak, but peak-ish numbers. And that's what was expected to happen, because that's what we can pay. That's how much of a loan banks will give us. The thing that has not happened on the single family side is, because there was no decline and everything in the single family market is based on appraisals. Well, values didn't go down, so appraisal stayed high. Appraisal stayed high, so banks gave them more money. The banks gave them more money so they could basically afford to get the loans, and so the values didn't go down. Circular, right? But that doesn't happen in multifamily, because in multifamily, the appraisals are actually based on the interest that you're paying, the mortgage that you're paying. So as the mortgage goes up, automatically the appraisals go down. That didn't happen in single family. Today, if you're looking at a property, the appraisal should be down 30%. It's not down 1%. And so you can still pay the same amount for an overvalued property. So the multifamily business and any other commercial real estate business is a business. It understands that you cannot pay as much as you did yesterday because your interest, your mortgage is higher. So it automatically reduces the price. And the way it does it is by banks refusing to give you more money. They're like, no, I was going to give you 23 million a year ago. Today, I'm going to give you 19, right? Obviously, that's going to affect the value. So as a result, we have these 3,000 properties. And I think that of them, half, let's just call them half, are going to default. But that's 1.5% of the multifamily market. So what is going to happen is what is already happening and will continue to happen for the rest of this year, which is heavy discounting. There will be properties that will be sold at 30% off. But does it create the sort of distress that we saw in 2008? Absolutely not. Let's review 2008. The total, and by the way, let's do a little more math. I'm going to get geeky for a second here. So let's say all these 3,000 properties, every single one of them is going to default. They're not, but let's assume 100% default rate. And let's assume they're $30 million each, right? So that's a very nice round median number for these 200 unit properties. Well, that's $90 billion. Well, that sounds like a lot, 90 billion. But what was the equivalent number in 2008? what was the total size of the risk in the United States for defaults in the single family market in 2008? It wasn't 90 billion. It wasn't 900 billion. It was $8 trillion, 90 times higher than the risk we have in the multifamily industry today. You see what I mean? So, firstly, we can't say this is a systemic risk. That would be laughed at. $90 billion is not a systemic risk for a $30 trillion economy. Even $8 trillion, I would argue, was not a systemic risk back then, but everybody was afraid it would get worse. So we took the appropriate actions. But we had an $8 trillion problem that we solved, and we're still living with the consequences of that solution. And in multifamily, if every one of these properties is going to default, it's a $90 billion problem. That is the worst case number. All of them default, right? Well, $90 billion is still a very small, maybe 3 to 4% of the overall value of multifamily in the United States. The catch is this: everything that I just said falls apart when you look at office. Everything I've just said falls apart when I look at office, right? So the systemic risk is not multifamily. Multifamily is we'll get lots of discounts. We will get longer due diligence. We will get more money out from sellers for repairs and maintenance, simply because we have, right now, purchasing power and the sellers are not in a good place. So we'll just squeeze them and get more out of it. Well, that's great. That's discounting. That's lovely, and everybody loves it. But I don't think that applies for the office realm, which I think is facing a once in 100-year Armageddon.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more about that. I mean, the office situation, I don't see a way out. I really don't. Between the pandemic and everything that happened, I mean, we're not going back. At least not going back anytime in the next decade, if ever. So
yeah,
either these people pivot and change, which is going to be costly. Some are not going to be able to, or they just face the fact of reality, and that is, you're done.